Layla Monroe, a waitress clearing tables near closing time, caught the reflection in a half-empty beer glass, an arm lunging from the shadows, steel glinting straight for the man in the leather vest. She didn't think. She dropped the tray, dove forward, and took the blade to her ribs. The impact spun her into a chair, blood blooming dark against her apron. The man she had just saved, Dante Rock, captain of the Hells Angels, caught her before she hit the floor. His voice was low, rough with rage. "Get an ambulance now." Patrons froze. The attacker vanished into the night. Dante pressed his palm against her wound, eyes burning into hers. "Stay with me, girl. You saved the wrong man." Before sunrise, 300 bikers would roll into town, engines howling her name. Because in their world, loyalty is paid back in thunder. The knife flashed beneath the yellowed bar lights. Layla Monroe saw it a heartbeat before anyone else. The gleam of steel sliding between bodies, the quick twist of an arm, the sharp inhale that always comes before violence. She didn't think. She dropped the tray she was carrying, glass shattering at her feet, and threw herself across the narrow space between tables. The blade met her side before she even finished the lunge. The impact felt like fire and lightning all at once. It stole her breath, buckled her knees. Dante Rock, sitting at the corner booth with a whiskey in hand, turned at the sound. The man the knife was meant for, the captain of the Hells Angels, the name that made the whole town lower its eyes. He caught her just before she hit the floor, his arm sliding under her shoulders, her blood already darkening the leather on his sleeve. "Get an ambulance now," he barked, voice slicing through the stunned silence. Nobody moved. The bar had gone dead, paralyzed by fear and shock. The attacker, some local with a grudge older than his sobriety, backed towards the door, eyes wide, realizing too late that he'd hit the wrong person. Dante's men surged up from their stools. The door slammed open, then closed. Tires screeched outside. Layla gasped, clutching Dante's wrist with trembling fingers. "He was behind you," she whispered, breath ragged. "I know." His jaw locked tight. "You should have stayed out of it." "I saw the knife," she said, her lips pale, "and nobody else did." Her eyes rolled back, body going slack. Dante felt the weight of her collapse in his arms. He'd seen people die before, too many times to count, but not like this. Not for him. Sirens wailed somewhere in the distance. Dante looked up, his men surrounding him now, their leather vests catching the light. "Clear the street," he ordered. "Make room." When the paramedics rushed in, he was already there, holding her hand as they lifted her onto the stretcher. Her face was ghost white, the blood soaking through the fabric at her waist. "She needs a transfusion now," one medic shouted. Dante followed the gurney toward the door. A cop stepped in front of him. "You can't go with them, Rock." He stared at the badge, at the man behind it, and the look in his eyes said the rule didn't apply. "If she dies," he said quietly, "I'll make this whole city remember her name." The officer froze just long enough for Dante to step past him and climb into the back of the ambulance. The ride was a blur of noise, sirens, the rumble of tires, the medic's voice barking numbers that meant nothing to him. He sat beside Layla, pressing his palm against the wound, trying to keep her awake. "Why'd you do it?" he asked. "You don't even know me." Her eyelids fluttered, barely a breath escaping her lips. Somebody had to move. Her pulse stuttered under his fingers. Dante looked down at her, at the woman who had just stepped between him and death, without hesitation. She was nobody, a waitress, an ex-medic, someone living quiet in a loud world. But now her blood was on his hands, and that made her his responsibility. The hospital lights hit hard when they pulled up. The doors burst open, and the medics rushed her inside. Dante stepped out after them, his boots hitting the pavement. Deputy Ward was already waiting by the entrance, flanked by 2 officers, his expression sharp and weary. "She's not your problem," the deputy said. "She is now. You can't be here. You'll scare people." "I don't care who I scare," Dante growled. "You make sure she lives." Ward's mouth tightened. "That's up to the doctors." Dante's eyes flicked toward the ER doors. "Then you tell those doctors that if they let her die, this hospital's going to need more beds than it's got." The deputy didn't answer. He didn't have to. The sound in the distance said enough. Low, rumbling, growing louder with each passing second. Engines, dozens of them. The kind of sound that turns conversation into silence. Dante didn't look back. He walked through the glass doors, leaving bloody footprints behind him. Inside, the hospital staff parted as he passed. A nurse tried to stop him. "Sir, you can't—" He ignored her, pushing through to the emergency bay. He caught sight of Layla through the window. Doctors crowding around her, hands moving fast, machines beeping, lines tangled, blood soaked into gowns that couldn't keep up. He pressed his palm to the glass, jaw clenched so tight it hurt. He'd spent years making enemies, walking through fire and bullets without blinking. But this single act of someone else taking his hit, was something he didn't know how to fight. Behind him, the automatic doors hissed open again. Jax Calder stepped in, leather vest dusty from the road, eyes scanning the hallway. "She's in there?" Dante nodded once. Jax crossed his arms. "The boys are coming from the next chapter, from up north. I told them what happened." Dante didn't move. "How many?" "All of them." The words landed like a promise. Outside, the engines kept coming. 1, then 10, then 50. The night trembled under their arrival. Dante closed his eyes for a second, letting the sound sink in. He'd seen war before. But this was different. This wasn't destruction. This was devotion. He turned to Jax. "Nobody rides until she breathes." Jax nodded. "Understood." Dante looked back through the glass again. Layla's heartbeat flickered across the monitor, a thin green line fighting to stay steady. He watched the doctors move faster, shouting orders, and the reflection of the hospital lights gleamed against the leather patch on his chest. Hell's Angels. Outside, the first of the bikes parked along the curb, their riders standing silent in the glow of streetlights. More followed, lining the block. No shouting, no chaos, just a wall of chrome and purpose. Dante stayed there unmoving, the sound of engines rolling through the night. He didn't know her name an hour ago, but now the entire world would learn it the way his men did, through loyalty, paid back in thunder. The hallway outside the emergency room smelled of bleach, adrenaline, and fear. Dante Rock hadn't moved in half an hour. Every few minutes, a nurse in blue scrubs would rush through the automatic doors, carrying blood bags or bandages, eyes flicking toward him, but never meeting his. Everyone in that hospital knew who he was. They also knew better than to ask him to leave. Layla Monroe's blood was on his hands, drying into the cracks of his skin like a stain that refused to wash off. He stared at the thin window in the ER door, the sterile chaos on the other side, the motion of gloves, the blinking lights. He'd seen field hospitals, men screaming through morphine and dust. But this was different. This was silence broken only by the rhythm of a heart monitor that stuttered each time her pulse faltered. Jax Calder stepped beside him, leaning against the wall, his leather vest gleaming faintly under the fluorescent light. "She's still in there." Dante didn't turn his head. "They've been trying to stabilize her for 40 minutes. You think she's going to make it?" Dante's voice dropped. She has to. Outside, the deep rumble of engines began to multiply. One, then another, then a whole row of them. The sound bleeding in through the windows, like a low drum beat. The first wave had arrived. Bikers from the next chapter. Men who owed Dante their loyalty, their freedom, their lives. Word had traveled fast. A woman took a knife for Iron Hand. Inside the ER, a doctor shouted, "Pressure's dropping again." Dante's pulse synced with the beeping on the monitor. Then it stopped for half a second. Every muscle in his body went rigid. He stepped forward until his hand hit the glass. "Don't you quit," he whispered. The nurse inside looked up and froze. For a moment, their eyes met, her expression unreadable. His, a command carved out of steel. A security guard approached cautiously, one hand hovering near his radio. "Sir, you can't stand here." Dante turned slowly, his eyes cutting through him. "Say that again." The guard swallowed hard. "I just need the hallway clear." Jax pushed off the wall, towering over him. "The hallway's clear enough." The guard backed away. Dante didn't watch him go. His attention snapped back to the glass, just as the doctor barked, "We've got a pulse. Keep it steady." A breath he didn't realize he'd been holding left him all at once. He exhaled hard, hands on his knees, shoulders dropping. When he straightened, his voice was calm again. Too calm. "Get me whoever's in charge here." Jax arched an eyebrow. "You sure that's smart?" "She took a blade meant for me," Dante said. "If the people in there stop fighting for her, I'll make them wish they hadn't." 2 minutes later, a doctor came out. A tall man, mid-40s, his surgical mask still hanging from one ear. His name tag read, Dr. Franklin. He looked tired, impatient, and unimpressed by the wall of leather and tattoos waiting for him. "Mr. Rock, you need to understand that hovering here isn't helping." "I'm not here to help," Dante said evenly. "I'm here to make sure she lives." The doctor sighed. "We're doing everything we can, but she's lost a lot of blood. She's O negative. We don't have much in supply." Dante's eyes narrowed. "You're telling me the biggest hospital in Redwood doesn't have the most common emergency blood type stocked?" "It's not that simple," Franklin said, irritation rising. "It's a liability to accept outside donors without proper screening. We can't just take anyone off the street." Dante stepped forward until the doctor had to tilt his head to look up at him. "She didn't ask who I was before she took that knife. So you don't get to ask who we are before you save her." The doctor froze. For a second, Dante thought he might argue, but then Franklin looked past him, out the glass front doors. 300 yards away, the street was filling with motorcycles. Headlights glowed in the dark, beams cutting through the mist. One by one, riders parked their bikes, engines idling low, chrome glinting under the hospital lights. There were dozens already, more coming. Jax smirked. "Looks like the paperwork's about to get real complicated." The doctor swallowed. "Those are all yours?" Dante didn't take his eyes off him. "They're hers." Franklin adjusted his mask nervously. "You can't just—" "I can," Dante interrupted. "You want blood? You're looking at 300 men ready to give it. You test it, bag it, use it. No more excuses." Franklin hesitated, torn between procedure and survival instinct. "It's not protocol." "Protocol?" Dante's voice dropped to a low growl. "You'll explain protocol to the press when they find out you let a woman die because her donors rode Harleys." The doctor glanced at Jax, at the growing army outside, and realized there was no version of this that ended quietly. He exhaled, nodding once. "Fine. I'll start screening." "Good man," Dante said. "And Dr. Franklin paused mid-turn. "If she wakes up, you make sure I'm the first face she sees." The doctor nodded again, and vanished through the double doors. Outside, the first few bikers had already formed a line by the blood donation unit, rolling up their sleeves without a word. The street looked like a silent ceremony. No shouting, no threats, just hundreds of men who had spent their lives feared, now standing perfectly still for someone they'd never met. Deputy Ward arrived just as the news vans did. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved toward him. "Sheriff, is it true the Hells Angels have taken over the hospital?" Ward hesitated, eyes darting toward the massive line of bikers. He spotted Dante standing at the entrance, arms crossed. "They haven't taken over anything," he said finally. "They're making a donation." Inside, Dante watched the first blood bag fill, the deep red moving through the tube like a pulse that belonged to all of them. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just stood there, his reflection on the glass blending with hers on the hospital bed. The two of them, the feared and the fearless, bound by a single act neither could undo. The doctor came out again 15 minutes later, sweat on his forehead. "We've got enough blood for now," he said. "She's stable, but it's still critical. We'll know more soon." Dante nodded slowly. "Then we wait." He turned to Jax, voice steady. "No one leaves until she breathes." Outside, the engines roared once, a single unified sound, deep and controlled, echoing through the night. Not a threat, a promise. And in that moment, under the flicker of hospital lights and the weight of silence that followed, Dante Rock made an oath. Not the kind written in ink, but in blood. She'd taken a knife for him. Now he'd take the world for her. The sound came first, low, distant, like thunder crawling over asphalt. Then it grew. Within an hour, the entire street outside Redwood General was packed from end to end. Rows of Harleys gleamed under the floodlights, chrome catching every reflection from the hospital's glass facade. Engines idled in rhythm, steady, deliberate. Each one a heartbeat in a living, breathing wall of sound. 300 bikers had come from 3 states. Black leather, steel boots, club patches, and the red and white wings of the Hells Angels stretching in every direction. They didn't yell. They didn't threaten. They simply stood there, forming a circle around the hospital. To the people watching from inside, it looked like a siege. But to the men outside, it was a vow. One that wouldn't break until the woman inside took her next breath. Deputy Ward's voice broke the quiet inside the command van, parked across the street. "We've got national media on this," he muttered into his radio. "CNN, Channel 5, every blogger with a drone." A rookie officer looked up from the monitor. "What do we tell them?" "That 300 Hells Angels have the hospital surrounded." Ward rubbed his temple. "We tell them they're standing. That's all they're doing. Standing." "Sir, they're blocking every entrance except the ambulance bay." Ward looked out through the van's windshield at the endless line of bikes, their headlights aimed toward the hospital doors. He exhaled slowly. "If they wanted to block something, kid, we'd know. Trust me." Inside the hospital, Dante Rock sat in a waiting chair that looked too small for him. His jacket was folded over his knees, blood dried along the seams. Jax Calder was at his side, a phone pressed to his ear, giving updates to the other chapters still rolling in from neighboring towns. "They're on the I-5 now," Jax said, voice low. "ETA 20 minutes. Dante nodded. "Tell them no noise, no fights, no talking to cops. They're already here for you, boss, not for war." "I know," Dante said, "but the rest of the world doesn't." Through the wide glass windows, reporters were gathering. Lights popped, microphones waved in the air, voices chattered over each other. News anchors spoke into their cameras, as if narrating an invasion. "Tensions are rising outside Redwood General Hospital tonight. where hundreds of Hell's Angels members have arrived after reports that a local waitress was injured protecting their leader. Another reporter spoke louder. The situation appears to be peaceful for now, but law enforcement sources fear the presence of so many bikers could escalate. The feed cut off as Jax closed the blinds. "They'll spin whatever story sells best," he said. "Let them," Dante replied. "They're not here to understand. They're here to watch." Downstairs, nurses huddled behind the reception desk, whispering. "They've been here since 9, one said. "They haven't moved." "They're not hurting anyone," another replied. "They're just waiting." The head nurse frowned. "Waiting for what?" "For her," came a voice. It was Dr. Franklin, shoulders slumped, his face pale under the overhead lights. "They're waiting for her." He looked at the line of men outside the window, helmets tucked under their arms, faces still and quiet. "I've seen riots," he said softly. "This isn't one." Outside, the media crews closed in. One young reporter tried to approach the nearest biker, a towering man with tattoos winding up his neck and the word loyalty across his knuckles. "Sir, why are you here?" she asked, voice trembling. He didn't answer. He just looked at her once, then pointed toward the hospital behind him. "For her," another biker said simply, stepping up beside him. "That's it." The clip went viral before midnight. Aerial drone footage showed the convoy, rows upon rows of Harleys circling the hospital like armor, their headlights glowing white against the dark pavement. The video title read, "The Angels Are Guarding a Stranger." Inside, Dante sat unmoving, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the door that led to the ICU. He'd been through shootouts, funerals, police raids, but this quiet, was the loudest thing he'd ever heard. Jax came back from a call. "It's official," he said. "The whole country is watching. Hashtags, news alerts, the works." Dante didn't look up. "Good. You want that kind of attention?" He finally met Jax's eyes. "I want the world to remember her face if she doesn't make it." Jax was quiet for a moment. "She's tougher than she looks. Hell, she took a blade like a soldier." Dante's jaw tightened. "She used to be one. Medic. I saw the tag on her necklace." "Figures," Jax muttered. "Only someone trained would move that fast." They fell silent again. The clock ticked. The hospital hummed. Around midnight, Deputy Ward stepped inside the lobby, his boots echoing on the tile. The crowd of bikers outside turned to watch him through the glass, but didn't move. He walked up to Dante, who stood to meet him halfway. "You can't stay here all night," Ward said. "I'm not leaving." "Neither are they," Ward countered. "You're choking this place with fear. The staff's nervous. The patients are scared." "They're alive," Dante said flatly. "That's more than I can say for her if you make me walk out that door." Ward's voice dropped. "You're making a mistake." Dante stepped closer, close enough that Ward had to tilt his head back. "You ever seen 300 men stand still for anything?" he asked. "You think that's a mistake? That's what loyalty looks like." The deputy looked away first. "Just don't let it turn into something else." Dante's tone softened. "It won't, unless you make it." Ward left without another word. By 2 a.m., the hospital parking lot had turned into a silent camp. Some bikers sat on the curb, helmets resting beside them. Others stood in clusters, smoking in the glow of their headlamps. A few knelt beside their bikes, heads bowed. Inside, the nurses began taking coffee out to them. Nobody asked for it. They just accepted it, with quiet nods. The tension that had filled the air earlier began to shift, fear turning into uneasy respect. At one point, an old man in a wheelchair on the 4th floor pulled his curtains aside and watched them. "They're not devils," he whispered to his nurse. "They're guardians." Around 3, the sound of one engine broke the rhythm, a deep guttural growl that rose like a challenge and then faded. It was followed by another, then another. One by one, the riders began revving their bikes in short bursts, a rolling wave of sound that rippled across the hospital grounds. It wasn't chaos. It was ritual, a way of saying, "We're still here." Dante stepped outside into the cool air, hands in his pockets. He looked at the sea of chrome and headlights, at the rows of men who had come not to fight, but to stand witness. The engines hummed low, a mechanical heartbeat. He felt Jax step beside him. "They're asking if they should keep the engines running till sunrise." Dante's eyes stayed on the hospital windows. "No," he said. "Let the engines rest. She needs the quiet more than we do." One by one, the revving stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, almost sacred. And above it all, from inside the ICU, a single sound broke through. The steady, fragile beep of a heart monitor. For the first time that night, Dante Rock let out a breath that sounded almost like a prayer. Outside, 300 men waited without a word. The reporters, the cops, even the sky seemed to hold still. And in the middle of it all, between the weight of fear and the hum of hope, one truth began to form, the kind you don't need to say out loud. This wasn't a siege. This was devotion written in chrome and silence. By dawn, the hospital was running on nerves and caffeine. The sun pushed through the fog, lighting the faces of the bikers still standing guard. Their leather jackets were damp with dew, their eyes red from sleeplessness, but not one of them moved. Inside, the ICU buzzed with exhaustion. Layla Monroe's vitals had stabilized for a few hours, but as the morning stretched on, her blood pressure began to drop again. The transfusion had slowed the bleeding, but not enough. She was running out of time. Dr. Franklin stood over her chart, jaw tight, thumb rubbing the edge of the clipboard. A nurse approached, voice trembling. "We're down to the last O-negative unit." He looked up sharply. "What do you mean the last?" "The blood bank's empty, sir. The supply truck from San Diego hasn't come in yet." Franklin swore under his breath. "Get me the director now." In the waiting room, Dante sat perfectly still, elbows resting on his knees. He could feel it. Something shifting inside those walls, something wrong. The tension in the nurses' faces told him what words hadn't yet. He rose to his feet just as Dr. Franklin appeared in the doorway. The man hesitated when he saw Dante. "She's critical again," he said, tone clipped. "She needs more O-negative blood, and we don't have any." Dante's voice was calm, almost too calm. "So get some." Franklin met his stare. "That's not how it works. There's a shortage statewide." Dante took a step closer. "You have 300 people outside who'd bleed for her if you asked." The doctor shook his head immediately. "I can't. It's not procedure. We don't know their medical histories. We can't test fast enough." "She's dying now." Franklin's composure cracked. "You think I don't know that?" He ran a hand down his face. "We can't just pull blood from anyone off the street." Dante's eyes darkened. "They're not anyone. They're mine. And she saved me." Franklin hesitated. "Look, even if we could test them, it would take hours to process." "Then start," Dante cut in. "Test every man out there until you find one that matches. I don't care how long it takes." Jax Calder, who'd been listening from the hallway, stepped forward. "Boss, half the crew's already O-negative. You know how it runs in the chapters." Dante turned to him. "Then tell them to line up now." Jax nodded once, disappeared through the automatic doors, and 30 seconds later, the low rumble of engines came alive again outside. Dr. Franklin followed them to the glass entrance. His breath fogged against the window as he watched the impossible happen. 300 men forming 2 long lines down the hospital drive, rolling up their sleeves in silence. Some of them had tattoos creeping up their arms, scars carved from other lives, but every one of them stood still, ready. The doctor whispered almost to himself, "This is insane." Dante stood beside him. "No, this is loyalty." The first nurse stepped out with a cart of sterile supplies, her hands shaking. The man at the front of the line, a hulking biker with a silver beard, offered his arm without a word. The needle slid in. Dark red filled the tube. Another nurse followed, then another. Soon the hospital staff moved in rhythm, taking blood from one biker after another. They set up folding chairs under the awning, IV stands next to motorcycles, gloves snapping in time with the hum of idling engines. Camera crews filmed from across the street, their lenses capturing the surreal scene. Headlines spread across the country. Hell's Angels turn blood donors in dawn vigil. From thunder to mercy, bikers save stranger. Inside, Dr. Franklin barked orders. Label them, tag every unit by donor, get the lab to run emergency screenings. A nurse turned wide-eyed. "Sir, there's too many. They just keep coming." "Then keep taking," he shouted. By the 3rd hour, the hospital's coolers were full. More bikers waited in line anyway, hands flexing, ready to give more if they could. The sound outside was no longer menacing. It was rhythmic, almost reverent. A steady chorus of engines rumbling low, the mechanical equivalent of prayer. Dante stood among them, sleeves rolled up, blood running through the line into a plastic bag. A nurse glanced nervously at the tattoos on his arms. Honor, debt paid, never fold. But when she looked up at his face, she found no threat there, just focus. He caught her staring and said quietly, "She took my knife for me." The nurse swallowed. Why? He didn't answer right away. Because someone had to. She finished labeling his bag, voice barely above a whisper. "We'll get it to her." When he walked back into the hospital, Dr. Franklin met him at the corridor. "We've got enough for now. Her vitals are holding, but she's weak." "How long?" Dante asked. "She's stable," Franklin said carefully. "That's all I can tell you. But if she makes it through the next 12 hours, she will." Dante interrupted. "She didn't come this far to stop now." The doctor studied him for a long moment, before nodding once. "You're lucky, Rock. Not many men get saved by a stranger like that." Dante looked through the glass toward the ICU. She's not a stranger anymore. Reporters outside were now broadcasting live. A news anchor spoke over footage of the blood drive. What began as fear has turned into one of the largest spontaneous donations in state history. Members of the Hells Angels, typically known for defying authority, have remained peaceful, cooperative, and unwavering in their vigil for the woman who saved their leader. Another clip showed a young biker holding his phone up to the camera. She didn't care who he was. She just moved. So now we move for her. Inside, Dante watched the television silently. Jax leaned against the wall beside him, a grin tugging at the edge of his mouth. "They're calling it the Red Dawn. You see that?" "Let them call it what they want," Dante said. "We know what it is." "And what's that?" He looked at the ICU door. "A debt for the rest of the morning." The bikers stayed where they were, even as fatigue set in. Some sat cross-legged on the pavement drinking water. Others leaned against their bikes, watching the sky turn from gray to blue. Dr. Franklin stepped outside just before noon. The reporters swarmed him immediately. "Doctor, can you confirm whether the patient's condition has improved?" He hesitated, then nodded once. "She's still with us. That's all I can say." From somewhere in the crowd, an engine revved, just once, a single short burst. Then another answered, then another. The sound spread down the line like a wave. Hundreds of engines rumbling in unison, a sound that seemed to shake the pavement itself. Inside, the noise echoed through the ICU. The nurse tending to Layla looked up from her monitors. Her patient's pulse, faint moments ago, had strengthened, a steady rhythm pulsing against her skin. In the waiting room, Dante looked up too, hearing the thunder outside. He didn't smile, didn't speak. He simply stood, his eyes on the ICU door. Somewhere deep inside that room, she was still fighting. And outside, 300 engines reminded the world that she wasn't fighting alone. Night returned heavy and slow, pressing down on Redwood City like the air before a storm. The hospital's floodlights burned white against the dark, casting long shadows across the hundreds of bikes lined shoulder to shoulder. Engines no longer ran. They waited. Every man outside could feel it, the thin line between life and death, playing out behind those glass walls. Inside the ICU, the machines told a story no one wanted to hear. Layla Monroe's pulse was fading again. Her skin had gone pale, her breathing shallow. Dr. Franklin stood over her bed, voice sharp and low. "She's slipping. Give her another 2 units. The nurse hooked the new bag, blood dripping slow through the tube. "Pressure still dropping," she said. Franklin leaned in closer. "Come on, Monroe. Stay with me." Out in the hall, Dante Rock stood motionless, hands clasped behind his back. He had been there for hours, not moving, not blinking, every muscle locked like stone. A nurse passing by whispered, "He hasn't eaten. He hasn't even sat down." Jax Calder handed him a cup of black coffee, but Dante didn't take it. He was staring through the ICU glass, lips barely moving. "She's still fighting." Jax followed his gaze to the monitor. The line was unstable, dips and spikes like a heartbeat drowning in its own silence. "She's tougher than any of us," he said quietly, "but she's got nothing left." Dante finally turned. His voice was low, calm in a way that made Jax uneasy. "Then we give her something to hold on to." Jax frowned. "What do you mean?" "Sound," Dante said. "She heard us before. Maybe she needs to again." He pulled his phone from his pocket, dialed a number. "Tell the men to start their engines." Within seconds, the command spread down the line like a current. Outside, helmets turned. Gloved hands reached for ignitions. The first Harley coughed to life, a deep growl that echoed off the hospital walls. Then another, then 10, then 100. Inside, the nurses jumped at the sudden roar. "Doctor!" Franklin glanced toward the window. "What the hell?" The sound rose, rolling through the corridors, rattling the floor under their feet. It wasn't chaos. It was rhythm. The synchronized thunder of engines rising and falling, like a heartbeat the size of the earth itself. Dante stood by the glass, watching the monitors. "Come on," he whispered. "Hear it. In the bed." Layla's body twitched just barely, a flicker of motion that made the nurse freeze. "Doctor," she said quickly. "Look." Her pulse climbed by a single point, then another. The monitor beeped faster, steadier. The faint color began returning to her cheeks. Franklin stared, stunned. "How?" Dante didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked on the green line. Outside, the bikers kept the engines rolling, their thunder filling the night. The roar wasn't violent. It was steady, pulsing alive. Each engine taking a turn, each rider adding their own heartbeat to hers. 1,000 pistons rising and falling like lungs breathing in sync. Franklin snapped out of it. "Keep the transfusion going. Don't stop." The nurse's hands moved fast, replacing the nearly empty bag with another fresh one. "Pressure's up, 90/60. Dante's hand hit the glass, blood still crusted at his knuckles. "That's it, Layla. Keep fighting." The camera crews outside caught the moment. From above, it looked like a ritual. 300 bikers lined around the hospital, engines burning through the night. Some had their heads bowed, eyes closed. Others stared straight ahead, whispering words only they understood. One reporter murmured into her mic, "They said they wouldn't leave until she breathed, and it sounds like the whole world is breathing with them." By midnight, the sound had become one unbroken note of power and hope. Even the cops had stopped pretending to control the scene. Deputy Ward stood with his hands on his belt, watching the line of motorcycles glowing red and gold in the floodlights. "She's going to make it, isn't she?" a young officer asked beside him. Ward didn't look away from the scene. "If anyone can, it's her. Look at them. They'd trade their lives for one more beat of her heart." Inside, Dr. Franklin called it out loud. "She's stable, heart rate steady, 100 BPM and holding." The nurse smiled through tears. "She's breathing on her own." Franklin lowered his head for a moment, the weight of the night finally catching up to him. "That's one for the books," he whispered. Dante's breath trembled once. He didn't move, didn't cheer, just closed his eyes. Outside, as if sensing the shift in the air, the engines slowly began to quiet. One by one, they shut down, leaving behind a silence so deep it rang in everyone's ears. Jax stepped up beside Dante, voice low. "They can feel it. They know." Dante nodded slowly. "Then tell them to rest." Jax walked out through the doors, raising a hand. A signal passed down the line. The bikers took off their helmets, some setting them on their handlebars, others holding them against their chests. No one spoke. They just stood there under the hospital lights, heads bowed. From the 4th floor, a nurse opened the window a crack. The faint sound of the monitor, the beeping pulse of life, drifted out into the night. Dante heard it. So did they all. A soft sound, fragile but real, the kind of sound that meant victory. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, as if on cue, one engine started again. Not loud, just enough to break the silence. A ripple followed, 2 more, then 10. Then the full roar returned, not as fury, but as triumph. Dante stepped outside, the wind lifting his jacket as he looked at the horizon. The engines rose and fell behind him, a living symphony. He tilted his head back, eyes closed, feeling the vibration run through the ground, through the air, through the blood that still stained his skin. When he opened his eyes, he said quietly, "She's still here." And 300 engines answered. The room was quiet except for the slow, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Morning sunlight crept through the blinds, cutting across the sterile white of the hospital walls. Layla Monroe's eyelids fluttered once, then again, before she finally drew in a shaky breath. Her lungs burned as if they'd forgotten how to work. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. The ceiling lights blurred into halos, her body heavy and foreign. She tried to move, but the IV lines tugged against her arm. Then it hit her. The memory of the bar, the knife, the man in the leather jacket, the look in his eyes. She winced. "Where?" Her voice came out raw, barely a whisper. "Easy," a voice answered. She turned her head toward it. Dante Rock sat in the chair beside her bed, elbows resting on his knees, dark circles under his eyes. His leather jacket was folded over the backrest, his shirt rolled at the sleeves, bandages peeking from his forearms. "You've been out for a while," he said softly. "Almost 2 days." Layla blinked at him, her mind catching up with her heartbeat. "You're the biker." A faint smile touched his mouth. "That's one way to put it." She stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Did he get away?" "He did. Dante said. For now. She exhaled slowly. Figures. There was a pause, the kind that isn't uncomfortable, just heavy. He leaned back slightly, watching the sunlight play along the metal rail of her bed. They said you shouldn't be awake yet, he said. Guess you don't listen to rules either. Layla's voice was weak but steady. Rules didn't help much last time. Dante nodded, eyes fixed on the window. You shouldn't have done what you did. Would you have preferred I didn't? He looked back at her. I would have preferred you hadn't needed to. Her lips curved, the faintest trace of humor. That's not an answer. No, he said quietly. It's not. They sat in silence for a few breaths. Outside the window, sunlight caught the faint shimmer of chrome. Rows of motorcycles still lined the parking lot. Engines quiet now, their riders sprawled on curbs or leaning against the walls, asleep where they'd stood guard all night. Layla followed his gaze. They're still here. Every one of them. Why? He hesitated, choosing his words. Because they don't leave one of their own behind. She frowned slightly. I'm not one of you. He held her gaze. You are now. The weight in his tone made her look away. The monitors kept beeping, filling the silence. I didn't do it for you, she murmured. I saw a man about to die. That's all. That's exactly why it mattered, he said. She studied him, the exhaustion behind his voice. He looked nothing like the man she'd imagined when she first saw the angels walk in that night. He wasn't wild or careless or cruel. He looked tired, human. Do they all listen to you like that? She asked. Only when it counts. So when you told them to come here, I didn't have to, he interrupted. They came anyway. Layla turned her head toward the window again. The morning breeze lifted the blinds just enough for her to see the sunlight bouncing off a row of helmets, the red and white patches catching the light like polished badges. They stayed for me. They stayed because of you, Dante said. Because you reminded them why we ride in the first place. And why is that? He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. Because the world thinks loyalty is dead. You proved it isn't. The words hung in the air between them. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. That's a heavy thing to put on someone who just got stabbed. You carried it anyway, he said. For a while, the only sound was the soft hum of the machines. Dante stood, stretching stiff muscles that had forgotten what rest felt like. You'll be here a few more days, he said. Doctors say you're lucky. Layla tilted her head. You don't believe in luck? He smiled faintly. No, I believe in choice. She watched him walk to the door, his boots silent against the tile. Dante, she called. He stopped, hand on the door frame. Why did you stay? He looked back at her, blue eyes clear, but heavy. Because someone had to. She almost smiled. That's what I said. Yeah, he said. And now we're even. He left before she could answer, the door closing softly behind him. Outside, the morning had turned bright and sharp. The hospital staff was beginning to relax, the tension in their shoulders easing for the first time in days. The bikers stretched, yawned, poured coffee from thermoses that had gone cold overnight. When Dante stepped outside, Jax Calder handed him a folded paper. Yesterday's newspaper. Across the front page was a photo. Dozens of bikers lined up, sleeves rolled, blood bags hanging beside their Harleys. The headline read, Loyalty Written in Blood. Dante looked at it for a long time, then folded it in half and tucked it into his jacket pocket. She's awake, he said. Jax grinned, relief softening his weathered face. Told you she wouldn't quit. She's stronger than all of us, Dante said. Maybe that's why she fits in, Jax replied. Dante looked toward the ICU window. the faint outline of Layla's figure visible behind the blinds. "No," he said quietly. "She doesn't fit in. She reminds us what we forgot." Behind them, the engines started to rumble again, not in chaos this time, but softly, like an exhale shared by 300 men who could finally breathe. And somewhere inside, the woman who'd stopped a knife with her own body opened her eyes fully to the sound of thunder rolling gentle through the morning light. The morning Layla Monroe left the hospital, Redwood City stopped moving. Every street near Redwood General had been closed by sunrise. Police cruisers lined the intersections. News vans crowded the sidewalks. And above it all, the low electric hum of expectation filled the air. Inside the lobby, Layla sat in a wheelchair near the front doors, her hospital gown hidden under a denim jacket that Dante had left for her. The patch stitched across the back wasn't club colors, just a simple winged emblem, clean and unclaimed. She kept tracing the stitching with her fingers, her thoughts quiet, her heartbeat steady. Dr. Franklin stood beside her. "You sure you're ready for this?" Layla smiled faintly. "After everything I've seen, I think I can handle walking through a few doors." But she wasn't ready for what waited on the other side. When the doors slid open, sunlight poured in like a flood. The sound hit her next, hundreds of engines starting at once, low and synchronized, a living wall of thunder that made the glass vibrate. 300 bikers stood in formation, engines idling in rows that stretched down both sides of the street. The crowd behind the barricades fell silent. Reporters lowered their cameras, unsure whether to speak or simply watch. Dante Rock stood at the front, helmet under his arm, eyes locked on hers. His expression didn't change, but the way he exhaled, slow, steady, said everything. Layla's breath caught. "Are they really all here for me?" Dr. Franklin nodded. "Seems so." He started to push her chair forward, but Dante was already walking toward her. He knelt down, met her gaze. "Can you stand?" "I can try." "Then don't let anyone roll you out of here," he said quietly. "You walked into that knife standing. You should leave standing too." Layla hesitated, then planted her feet on the ground. Pain shot through her side, but she pushed herself up anyway. Dante steadied her by the elbow, just enough to keep her balanced, not enough to make her feel weak. When she straightened, the engines outside roared higher, like a tide rising to meet her. Dante turned to his men and raised one hand. Instantly, the noise dropped into rhythm, one deep, unified growl that pulsed through the pavement. Dr. Franklin stepped back, blinking against the light. He'd seen 100 surgeries, but nothing like this. Layla looked around, eyes wide. The bikers weren't shouting, weren't cheering. They just nodded as she passed, a silent salute, each one dipping their head as her steps echoed across the concrete. Some had bandages wrapped around their arms, reminders of the blood they'd given her. Halfway down the steps, she paused. "They don't even know me." Dante stood beside her. "They don't have to." Camera shutters clicked from every angle, capturing the moment. A wounded woman walking out of the hospital, flanked by the most feared motorcycle club in California. Their engines holding a note that sounded more like reverence than rebellion. A child on his father's shoulders pointed and whispered, "Dad, are those the bad guys?" His father shook his head slowly. "Not today." Layla reached the bottom of the stairs. Dante gestured to a single bike parked in the center of the line, chrome shining, seat low, handlebars clean and untouched. "That one's yours," he said. She stared at it, incredulous. "I can barely walk." He smiled faintly. "Then ride slow." She laughed, the first real laugh in days. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." Layla ran her hand along the leather seat, feeling the vibration of nearby engines through her fingertips. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already did," Dante said. She climbed on carefully, the weight of the world suddenly lighter. Dante swung onto his own bike beside her. He turned to the rows behind him and gave a single nod. Engines ignited like a fuse. The sound rolled down the street, swallowing the noise of the crowd, rising into something holy. Layla could feel it vibrate through her ribs, a chorus of power and peace. One heartbeat made of 300 engines. When the first tires rolled forward, police didn't move to block them. They simply watched as the convoy pulled into motion. Dante in front, Layla just behind him, flanked by the riders who had waited through every hour of the night. They rode slowly through downtown, through streets lined with onlookers holding phones and signs that read, "Thank you," and "Brave Heart." Children waved flags. Old men removed their hats. No one said a word. They didn't need to. As the convoy disappeared over the ridge, the sound faded into the morning breeze, leaving behind only the echo of what had happened. A town that would never forget the day thunder sounded like gratitude. And somewhere between the roar of engines and the rhythm of her heartbeat, Layla finally understood. She hadn't just saved one man. She'd reminded 300 of them what it meant to feel human again. The weeks that followed passed quietly, as if the town itself was still recovering from the echo of that thunder. Redwood City went back to its routines, but nothing about it was the same. The diner reopened. In the quiet chaos of a dimly lit bar, one ordinary waitress named Layla Monroe saw a flash of steel and chose to leap, not for glory, not for reward, but because someone had to. She took a knife meant for a stranger, a Hell's Angels captain feared by an entire town, and in that single selfless act, she didn't just save a life. She reignited a fire in 300 hardened souls. They roared into the night, not with violence, but with devotion, donating blood, standing guard, breathing life back into her through the thunder of their engines. This is the raw, beating heart of true loyalty. It doesn't ask who you are, what you ride, or where you've been. It simply shows up, sleeves rolled, ready to bleed for the one who moved first. In a world quick to judge the leather and the patches, Layla reminded us that courage isn't loud. It's the quiet choice to step between danger and another human being. And loyalty, it's the echo that follows, the promise that no act of bravery goes unanswered. So ask yourself, when was the last time you moved without thinking, gave without counting the cost? That's the spark that changes everything. What about you? Have you ever witnessed or shown loyalty that shook your world? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a tale that proves humanity still roars louder than fear.